Fabulous. So thank you again for joining. I am going to also share the InfoCon website in the chat so that if you are interested in continuing to participate in any of the events that we have going on, either today or tomorrow, you are welcome to continue looking at the schedule and seeing which sessions sound good to you. You can also click on each session and it will tell you more information about the session itself. It'll provide you with the Zoom link, and it will also tell you or give you information about the faculty members who are participating and hopefully link to their specific website on their university's homepages. So we are going to get started here. Let me just make my screen accessible. There we are. All right, so I will continue to admit people as they come into the room. So my two faculty members, you don't have to do that. Don't worry, I got you. But thank you so much for joining. So my name is Emma Kopko. I am the Assistant Director for Recruitment and Admissions at the School of Information Sciences at the University of Illinois, Urbana-Champaign. And today we're going to talk about digital accessibility. So I have just a quick slide with some information about the U of I. So we are located in Central Illinois, for those who aren't aware. We're a Research One institution. We're ranked among the top 25 universities around the world by the Center for World Rankings from 2021 to 2022. We also are a School of Information Sciences, and we've been around for over 125 years. We're approaching our anniversary here either at the end of this year, beginning of next. We do have the #1 LIS program in the country. We've been ranked #1 since 1996. We're a leader in online education, and we have world-renowned faculty with interdisciplinary interest, and you're going to see two of our faculty members on the next slide and have a conversation with them today. And then we have a strong network of alumni professionals, which is great for students. They can connect and network with people who are in the same geographic region or even the same field. And then we also have flexible, distinct programs, and we provide a lot of different experiences for our students to gain real-world professional skills prior to graduating. So just a quick snapshot of our school. And then here are two of the faculty members who are participating today in the panel. So the topic again is digital accessibility. I will let each faculty member introduce himself, but we do have Ju-Young Seo and Yang Wang, and I'm going to let them go ahead and talk a little bit about their experience in education, what their research focuses are, and then we can jump right into a conversation. So Ju-Young, are you ready?
Absolutely. Do you hear me okay?
Yes, we can.
Yeah, thank you very much. I'm so honored to be able to be part of this session. And let me briefly introduce myself. My name is Ju-Young Seo. I'm currently working as an assistant professor in the School of Information Sciences at the University of Illinois, Urbana-Champaign. My research focuses on accessible computing in the context of learning sciences, information and learning sciences. I have some ongoing project for accessible makerspaces and inclusive data science for people who are blind or visually impaired. Yes, I'm so excited about this session. I want to talk more about myself and my research later. Thanks.
All right, great. Hello, everyone. My name is Yang Wang. I'm also a faculty member here in the iSchool. I'm trained as a computer scientist, and my research mainly focuses on the intersection between human behavior and privacy and security. So for the past maybe 5 years or so, I got interested into sort of privacy and security needs of sort of the marginalized groups. And in particular, I've been working with people with disabilities to design tools that can support them to better protect their privacy and security. So I'm not really a computer accessibility expert, unlike Ju-Young, but I have a little bit of experience working with marginalized groups. And thank you for having me.
Well, thank you to you both. We're very excited to learn a little bit more about your research and digital accessibility at large. Just for everybody who is participating in this panel today, this is a very open-ended conversation. So we're not going to have like a formal kind of presentation. We want you to ask questions. We want the faculty members to be able to engage with you and just have a nice dialogue rather than you wait to ask questions or having a more formalized presentation. So if you have specific questions for either one of the panelists, please feel free to put them in the chat box and I can ask them. So you don't have to try to monitor the chats, Yang and Ju-Young. But first, I'm going to kick off the conversation with just a really basic question that you both can answer. Can you define digital accessibility?
Yeah, I want to go first then. My understanding of digital accessibility is making sure any digital content to be usable and accessible to anyone, regardless of their background, gender, or /abilities. This is the simple but hard definition.
And I happen to agree with that great definition.
Fabulous. So I did encourage people to put their questions in the chat. I do have a list of a couple questions that I can ask. I do have to just minimize my screen for a moment to pull them up here. Just give me a second. Sometimes I feel like Zoom is very user-friendly and other times I don't agree with it at all. All right, so do you have differing interpretations of digital accessibility or different ways that the two of you might work with it?
Julian, would you like me to go first?
Yes, please go ahead.
Great. So yeah, I think you gave a really good definition of digital accessibility to me, because I wouldn't claim I'm a digital accessibility expert, but based on my experience working with marginalized groups, I feel like you really need to look into the specific user populations you're working with to understand their own unique accessibility needs. So even though the definition might seems to be like a kind of a universal definition, when you are designing technologies or I don't know, information resources for a particular population, you need to really understand their needs. So it has to be quite specific.
Right. I completely agree. Sometimes I see we need some customized level of accessibility depending on who you are working with. Say, for example, the needs for people who are blind or visually impaired versus people who have hard of hearing, who are deaf, it could be different because blind people, for example, just for information, I have a visual impairment. I'm almost totally blind myself. We blind people, just like me, we use lots of audible channel. So we use a screen reading software and refreshable brightness display. So those are good channels and senses. However, for people who are deaf or hard of hearing, they use a lot of visual senses, visual channel. So sometimes we have to customize the level of accessibility, how we can convey the information based on the ability of our target user or audience. So I think the scope of accessibility is very, very flexible and customizable instead of one fit all for all definition.
Fabulous. Thank you so much for sharing. Would the two of you be able to talk about the kinds of accessibility needs you've seen based on your specific areas of expertise and how you're working to meet the needs of those kinds of individuals?
Do you want me to go first? Yeah.
Yes, please
Yeah.
go ahead.
Yes. So I focus on STEM education and STEM learning and some challenges of people with disabilities. Um, I with a special focus on people who are blind and visually impaired because I'm a lifelong blind learner myself. I have faced lots of challenges when I studied computer programming and lots of scientific notations and other STEM materials. It's a lot of visual information, and I see huge challenge, and I do leverage technology and other human computer interaction design, ability design to address some accessibility issues. So my research and work, it focuses on how to maximize the ability of people with disabilities to be engaged with some challenging areas and topics such as STEM. So my current research includes tactile coding kits for blind people to easily learn computer programming. And I also developed some tools that can represent data visualization in sound using stereo sound and different tones and pitches. And also I represent data patterns in tactile form so that it can be touchable for blind people to be easily understandable. So this kind of work, is what I'm currently focusing on.
Great. Yeah, those are fascinating projects. So for me, like I said, I focus primarily on privacy and security. I'll give two examples in my own work. So one example is a recent project. It's a collaboration between my group here at UIC and some colleagues in other university. And we were focusing on this particular challenge that people with visual impairments or blind users might encounter, which is they like to take photos and videos, but it is challenging for them to identify or even knowing whether the pictures or the videos they took contain any unnecessary, sensitive or private content before they go ahead and share them on social media, right? So normally they would just ask some friends or family members to do that, but again, it's hard for them to do this independently. So as a part of our research, we were working on a sort of AI algorithm that can automatically identify sensitive or private content from these visual materials and remind our blind users before they share them, right? So that's sort of an easy example that you can see this could be a challenge. And another example where it's less obvious, which it was an eye-opener for me. So, we all log into various websites or web-based accounts for, devices all the time. And we kind of take this kind of authentication login process for granted. You just type down the password, the username, and then you logged in. But for users with visual impairments, that's not as easy as you might expect. So for instance, even identifying the correct authentication element on a web page can be quite time consuming because the websites weren't designed in a way that facilitates screen reader users reading habits. Give you another example. Once they correctly enter their username and password and hit enter, presumably they're logged in. For a sighted user, usually it's quite easy for us to say, oh, actually I'm logged in, right? It's very easy for us to tell that. But for blind users, they actually have to make an inference based on what they hear on the page to decide or to determine whether they're logged in. So this process becomes much, much longer. So those are the kind of examples we oftentimes do not expect. And then my students and I are building technologies to support that process.
Wonderful. Thank you both for sharing so much about your own research and what you're working on. Now, you've both talked about digital accessibility in terms of people who are visually impaired or who are hearing impaired. But who else can benefit from digital accessibility, and who are other people that can utilize these same types of programming that you're working on, but maybe aren't visually or hearing impaired? Either one of you can answer.
Jian, would you like to go first? Or you want me to?
Yeah. I can just briefly talk about the benefit of digital accessibility for all. So I want to give a specific example of one accessibility aspect. So people think alt text. Okay, for those who don't know what alt text is, alt text is alternative text attribute is being used for any image elements to provide additional information for the image for those who cannot see the image for various reasons. So blind people, they cannot see image. That's one possible case. Another case is if you have very poor internet connection so that you cannot use any kinds of conventional JavaScript, and you just want to use some text terminal to access the web page, then you have to suppress other image elements. Then that alt text is also used for that case. So and the other case is that so for search engine parsers, alt text is very useful metadata for machine to automatically collect and tag each image according to any specific categories. So it's very useful for machine. So it's even helpful for them to build a better machine learning algorithm based on the lots of bunch of image data sets if we have human provided alt text. So that's very specific area and example, but I'm just giving you some very understandable examples so that you can have a better sense of what digital accessibility, how and it can benefit other general people and beyond. And maybe Yang can give more examples, better examples.
I'll try. I'm not sure there will be better examples, but so here's one example from, again, my own work. Earlier, I was talking about users with visual impairments might have various challenges in logging into websites, accounts, and devices. So once we learned those challenges, we create a new tool to support that process. So imagine a blind user walks into a public library and wants to use a computer in the library. It's quite challenging if the library does not equip with accessibility or assistive tools to log in, right? So what we did is we created a password manager on their mobile device. So oftentimes they do have a mobile phone, and that's why we wanted to leverage that form factor. So they have a password manager on their mobile phone, and when they go to the library, we create a technology where the phone and the public library computer can create a secure communication channel. So when the user tries to log into, let's say, their web-based email on the public library computer, they will be able to actually transfer an encrypted version of their password to the public library computer and then log in. So this technology was designed originally for users with visual impairments, but when we tested with users both with and without visual impairments, what we found was that both groups, regardless of whether they have visual impairments, actually like this mechanism. And what's even more encouraging to our research group is that when we presented this in a conference and later on we found a company, Motorola, which is a US-based mobile phone manufacturer, they actually included a very similar mechanism similar to our system into one of their phones. So arguably, Motorola is targeting a wider broad audience, but the fact that this mechanism was included in the phone suggests that it could benefit the broader audience, not just those with visual impairments.
Great. Thank you both for explaining. I think that sometimes it might be hard for people like myself who are not focusing their work on digital accessibility or accessibility at large and might not have the background that the two of you do. Sometimes it's hard to understand how these different tools can be universally used. So I appreciate you sharing so much about each of your research and each of the ways that you're working to make digital accessibility essentially accessible for all and not just people who may have visual or hearing impairments. I do want to ask, how are you covering, or maybe it's not just you, but how is accessibility and digital accessibility covered in the coursework that we offer here at the iSchool?
Yeah, I can address that question first. I teach Introduction to Data Science. So my course basically covers how to visualize data, how to tidy data in programming language with R in my course. So I integrated accessibility principles in many ways, but one good example is visualization. So the term visualization itself implies that you have vision, and visualization is for those who can see. So I teach my students to think about other ways of data representations. Say, for example, okay, even though you can see the visualization, just imagine you are colorblind. And I use colorblind simulator. And I let them choose more colorblind friendly scale when they create visualization. And also I ask other more challenging questions. Okay, what if you cannot see the visualization at all, like blind people? Then there are some ways to represent your data, including sound. For example, I teach them how to use some sonification package. The term sonification means that you can represent data using stereo sound that is mapped to x-axis from left to right, and different pitches, tones that can represent Y value. Higher pitch will correspond to higher Y value, and lower pitch will correspond to lower Y value, etc. So I teach my student how to use a sonification package to represent the data in sound as well. So that way, not only that can help to represent the data data for differently, but they can feel, they can hear their data in a different way. They not only see the visualization, but also they also hear their data through sonification. That really helps for them to understand their data in a richer way. Also, I'll also teach them how to briefly and concisely describe their visualization, like alt text. So when we describe chart visualization, I teach them to follow 3 steps. First, include the type of graph, whether that's a bar chart or histogram or any type of graph. So you need to include the type of graph and showing the variable, whether there are X and Y, and what kind of variable are mapped on X and Y axis. And last but not least, the relationship, the pattern, the real pattern, whether there are some significant increases or decreases, or there are some high frequencies or lower frequencies in what value, in what way. So that kind of alt text description helps my student to revisit their data, because they don't just stop in making or coding the visualization, but also they can revisit their conceptual understanding of whether they truly understand the meaning of their visualization. And they describe their chart. While describing their chart, they can deeply understand the pattern and what they're trying to deliver out of their visualization. So this is how I teach my data science and maximize the accessibility in context of data visualization.
Great. I would just add that I've been teaching some of our human-computer interaction classes. So these are related to UI UX designs. Certainly, I think we should do more, but currently I sort of touch on accessibility in 2 aspects. The first one is when we talk about user-centered design, I draw students' attention into the diversity of users. So oftentimes people might think, you're designing for the general public. But as I cover in the class, that we really need to consider the wide range of users, and many of them are underserved and have particular challenges with interaction designs or computing systems. So when you design these systems, you have to be very mindful about these users and their needs. And kind of going back to what we talked about, digital accessibility is beneficial for everybody. So we brought up this idea of universal design, right? So if you explicitly consider the wide range of users, especially the ones that are marginalized or underserved, and their needs, the end result in terms of design is usually much better for everybody. So that's the first thing I cover. And the second thing I cover in my class is some basic accessibility checks and techniques. And in fact, thanks to Jun Yang, who co-taught the Intro to HCI class with me last year, where we covered web accessibility. Like, for example, given a particular website, how do you identify the potential accessibility issues? So there are various accessibility checkers you can use, and then how do you resolve those accessibility issues? In addition to that, we also covered document accessibility. So for example, how do you ensure the PDF document is accessible to a screen reader? So Jun Yang went great length into these topics and give students kind of the hands-on skills to improve the accessibility. but I'm sure we can do more.
I think that's probably a universal claim, not just within digital accessibility, but most likely all forms of information sciences. We can always do more. There is a question in the chat from one of our participants, so I'll just read it. Many products of Apple, such as the iPhone, have accessibility features such as vision and hearing. How do you evaluate these accessibility practices, and how does it contribute to the development of digital accessibility?
Okay, let me address that question first. Such a great question. Thank you so much for asking. Yes, right. There are many accessibility features out there and products. And it's good to know that you already know the built-in features of accessibility on iPhone. So yeah, for those who don't know built-in accessibility feature, Apple, Android, Mac, and Windows, they have built-in accessibility feature. So for example, you can turn on and turn off screen reading software feature of your operating system so that you can experience some of the assistive technologies. Yes. I think that really depends on what your target audience is, what you're trying to assess and evaluate. So like Yang and I talked before, sometimes accessibility is defined in a different way depending on the context you're trying to apply. So when I test usability and accessibility of, say, for example, healthcare, self-tracking healthcare app for blind people, I choose some of the apps that I am interested in, and I test the app within a certain environment. So I can choose either Android environment or iPhone environment, but I often test with iPhone first because many blind people use iPhone. Of course, there are Android users as well, but myself, I use iPhone. So then after we choose the target apps, we can activate the features, the built-in features of iPhone, such as voiceover and color contrast or magnifier. But the real problem is, I think you were wondering how we could evaluate based on what, against what. There is a very specific guideline suggested by Web Consortium, W3C. So it's called Web Content Accessibility Guidelines, WCAG. The current version is 2.1, and they also have mobile accessibility checklist guidelines. So when I test the accessibility for mobile apps, I based on the guidelines of WCAG 2.1. And when I test any physical accessibility, like a building architecture, I use universal design because universal design has its own 7 principles and its sub guidelines, very specific guidelines. So I can check whether current accessibility is good enough based on that kind of existing principles and guidelines. So yes, that's my current practice. Does that answer your question?
If I may, to put a shameless plug, about my class 236, which is essentially user research and evaluation. That's exactly the kinds of questions we cover in that class. So Junyang mostly talked about a type of expert review method where you have a set of guidelines and you as the UI UX expert walk through the design, the features, using those guidelines as criteria. But there's also another type of methods where you directly involve your target users in testing these features and identify potential issues. About your second question, how does it contribute to the development of digital accessibility? I'm not sure exactly what you refer to as it. So if it refers to the evaluation, I would say certainly, user evaluation is a critical component of the development. This is what we sort of approach the user-centered design process, where you want to engage your users throughout the design process, and frequent and iterative user evaluation are very, very helpful.
Wonderful. Thank you so much for your responses. I think that I'm going to ask a question just kind of leading the two of you, but where do you see digital accessibility in the future? How do you see it progressing as a field, or maybe what are the next topics that are really important to take on and to work on and challenge maybe?
Do you want me to go first?
Yeah, please.
Yes. So as far as I understand, the history of digital accessibility aligns with our human and society life, because the first discussion about accessibility actually was coming from universal design and architecture and building context, physical domain. At the time, we didn't have very much digital space like internet. But early 1990s, we ended up having some digital spaces. So we needed some guidelines, or we needed some attention to digital accessibility, because our human lives were moving from physical to digital spaces. But I think the future is mixed reality and virtual reality, just like a metaverse. So we're going to mix physical and digital spaces. So and we have developed some guidelines, as I just explained, mobile accessibility and digital accessibility, but we don't have any accessibility for IoT accessibility yet, Internet of Things accessibility. But I think we will probably have the kind of IoT accessibility soon, and more. I think we will need some accessibility for virtual reality and metaverse, because we're going to have the seamless life between physical and digital spaces. So this is my humble opinion.
That's a great point. I know we're in the final minute, so I'll be quick. I think for the future, I think in addition to the emerging technologies where we need accessibility, I think that these kind of high-level general accessibility design principles would be extremely helpful, right? So you can essentially apply these principles to other novel technologies where problem space to make whatever technologies they're designing to be more accessible. So those kind of general principles would be quite useful. And that's a hard problem because you have to distill the insights from multiple domains. And I think that's part of what the community is working on. Thank you.
Fabulous. Thank you so much for your responses. Does anyone have any other questions that they would like to ask the faculty members? Anything that you would like to know or something that maybe confused you? I did try to provide definitions for acronyms in the chat, because when I first started at the iSchool and people would just say things, I was like, I gotta write that down and go look that up later because I don't know what HCI means. I don't know what IoT means. So I'll give you a minute, and if you have any other questions, feel free to either unmute yourself and ask, or you can put them in the chat box as well. This session is about 40 minutes, and I do believe that we're right at time, which is kind of nice. So we can allow for a minute or two more of potential questions to be asked. I will also reshare the iSchool, or excuse me, the information and InfoCon website, so that if you wanted to join other panels, you could. We have 3 more today, I believe, and then we have panels tomorrow as well. You are welcome to join anything. We do have another iSchool of Illinois faculty member participating in the last session today, Maria Bond, who is the LIS program director. She's going to talk about the accessibility of graduate programs and STEM programs as well. So that's a really exciting topic that I'm excited to learn more about. But if you have questions for our faculty members and you weren't necessarily comfortable asking them on camera or anything, you can always email the email address that I'm typing into the chat box right now, and I can pass them along to either Ju-Young or Tuyan. But I just want to say thank you very much for joining today. I appreciate you listening. I appreciate you following up with questions. And I want to thank our 2 professors, Ju-Young Seo and Yang Wang, for taking time out of your very busy schedules to talk a little bit about your research, about the field of accessibility and digital accessibility, and just to illuminate all of us and share what you're working on, because I think it's very fascinating. And I do think that it's incredibly important work that you're both doing, albeit in kind of different sections of information sciences. But I do thank you for your participation today.
Thank you so much.
Thank you very much.
No, you're welcome. Thank you for being here. So if there are no other questions, I am going to stop the recording and I will close the room. So thank you again.